Morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin, and today's topic is wisdom. What is it that where's the magic transition point where knowledge becomes wisdom? I think it's an interesting conversation. So it should be fun. Before we get started, though, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding into your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, all your electrons, and creating a brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together. Very, very, very softly. Let's rub our fingers against our palms. Feel the deliciousness of that sensation, the tickling and the tingling, and allow it to make you present to your physicalness and how miraculous it is that we get to experience life through these magnificent physical forms. So welcome, welcome, welcome. It's great to be here with you. As always, and today's topic is wisdom. And I wonder what it is. I think we've talked about wisdom before, but I think that we know certain people that whom we consider wise. And what is it that makes those people or makes us have that perspective about those people? I don't think that wisdom is necessarily a function of age. Age can help because we've had more experience to inform our knowledge and our perspectives. At least that's the hope, right? That our years have contributed to a richer perspective. So I'm wondering, and by the way, I'm not seeing any comments. So if you guys are here and commenting, I'm not yet seeing them. Anyway, I'm just checking to make sure we're live on Facebook, and we are. So we should be good to go. Anyway, what is it about wisdom? I think maybe, there you are. Hi, Rosalind. Thank you for chiming in. I appreciate it. Welcome, welcome. It's always great to have you here with us. So wisdom, what is it that translates knowledge to wisdom? Because someone can be very, very knowledgeable, but not particularly wise, right? It's not just the facts. It's maybe how those facts or perspectives, maybe that's something that really informs wisdom, is a broader perspective, to be able to be viewing situations in a broader context, and maybe to be able to have a bunch of reference points for that knowledge. And maybe wisdom is something that is synthesized from multiple information sources, you know, rather than knowledge can be gleaned or fed by multiple sources. In fact, that's what gives greater credibility to knowledge, certainly, is to have been able to synthesize it from multiple places. So where does this wisdom thing come in? What is it that shifts or changes about knowledge? Maybe wisdom is perhaps, or part of wisdom is applied knowledge, perhaps. I think perspective has something to do with it. Experience has something to do with it. While we can have knowledge, I'm just thinking if wisdom is situational, I'm not, I think that perhaps we have different varying degrees of wisdom based on different circumstances. How could we be wise about something that we know nothing about? I think that's a worthy question, actually, because there may be places where a general perspective might be able to be applied to a circumstance that has many unknowns, and we could apply certain wisdom to. I wonder if all wisdom is timeless. I guess that's one of the things that is a consideration. And what is it? I know I'm filled with questions this morning. What is it that makes a person wise, or makes us perceive or consider that person to be wise? Is it because they are well considered? Is it because they look at a bigger picture? Are they wise in a way that spans different circumstances? So I think maybe a portion of wisdom is, well, wisdom perhaps is learned. If we think of the serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept those things I cannot change, courage to change those things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So what is that wisdom that is spoken of in that prayer? Perhaps I am thinking that it has to do with experience. When we're living lives in as conscious a way as possible, and we learn from our experiences and do our best to generate our highest lessons, then that gives us some credibility, to be able to assess a situation. I wonder, however, with we often can develop strong biases in our experience, and how do we discern that opinion, that belief, that idea? How do we discern what's wise and what's not wise, even if it is gleaned from experience? So Rosalind, you're so kind. Rosalind says, I come here for your wisdom. The point when a shift occurs or expands, reconciling with awareness to the present moment. Thank you, Rosalind. That's so kind. And I think you make a really strong point here, reconciling with awareness to the present moment. So and thank you for the perspective. I don't know about how wise I am. I think that maybe a part of wisdom is, as you're saying, awareness, being present to what's there. And I think that in our lives, we can often look to others for wisdom as if they know and we don't. And there have been situations in my life, and I imagine in yours as well, where I have deferred to other people's knowledge or even will by honoring their knowing more than my own. And maybe the things that we experience as wisdom have a resonance for us individually. You know, maybe that's what allows us to recognize wisdom. Maybe because we feel the truth of something within our own being, you know, within our own sense of how things are, or maybe there's a perspective that we hadn't considered that then feels like it's enriching us in some way. So I wonder if that's what our perception, what guides our perception of wisdom, you know, what elevates something to wisdom from something being simply an opinion. Maybe there's the willingness to look at things newly with a new eye. Good morning, Bernadette. So good to have you here with us. We're talking about wisdom and when does knowledge become wisdom, and what is it that makes someone wise? You know, what is it that we're perceiving as being wise? I think this is a very interesting thing to be considering, because one of the things that we do a lot, I think, is give away our power to people that we believe know more than we do or are more powerful than we are. And certainly there are people who know more than we do. And those are people that we can look to as mentors and teachers. But I heard an alarming story from a friend not that long ago, and this is one of the reasons that I question wisdom. I think it's important for us always to be alert and not to just accept things blindly. So and I may have told this story, but it just really concerned me. So the story is about a person in AA who has a mentor or a sponsor who's been in the program for something like 27 years. And the person that is in AA questioned something that the sponsor had advised. And the sponsor's response was something to the effect that they have a very powerful connection with their creator. And was this the person in AA questioning their relationship with the creator? In other words, saying, my connection to God is stronger than yours, and therefore you shouldn't question what I tell you. And this was horrifying to me, actually, because it is a subversion of our sovereignty, a subversion of our responsibility to make conscious and deliberate choices. It's kind of the way that horrors happen. Bernadette says that's so wrong on so many levels. That was my feeling too, Bernadette. Like, this is not okay. That, you know, this person is way out of line and they're representing themselves as the knowledgeable, wise one. And yet I think that wisdom doesn't assert itself in that way by dominance or domination. And I think that part of our own wisdom is based on being willing to look at all sides of things, you know, to be willing to question and to be willing to consider and to be willing to receive, but not to receive blindly or based on authority. You know, that dynamic that I was just talking about reminds me very much of the experiments that were done with people administering shock, that people agreed to be in a study. And in this study, there were actors that were on the receiving end of shock treatment. And there was another actor or experimenter who had a white coat on and was introduced as a doctor and the person in charge of the experiment, and something to that effect, you know, someone in authority. And the experimenter was instructing the really the subject to administer an electrical shock to this other person in another room, that they saw, they could hear, they could see, and that as the person being shocked made wrong answers to questions, the experimenter instructed the subject to increase the level of shock that was being administered, to the point where it got to a lethal shock. And I believe that it was 63% of the people in the experiment. Thank you. Yes, Dido says the Stanford prison experiment. I don't know. Good morning, Dido, by the way. It's so good to have you here with us. So 63% of the people followed the instruction of authority, because they might have been crying and saying no, 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 but they followed the instruction and administered what they knew would be a lethal dose of electricity to this person in the other room as part of an experiment. And I think that in the face of knowledge and wisdom, we are always beholden to be looking within and considering what is actually happening. And these times more than ever, as we are all being part of this massive social experiment in compliance. So Bernadette says, to me, wisdom is a suggestion of what one's experience is and sharing how to look at things potentially different. Wisdom is what we learn personally, not what another has told you, what you specifically have to do. Oh, not what another has told you, what you specifically have to do. You share the knowledge of your wisdom and leave the listener to make their own progress. So I think you've kind of nailed it there, Bernadette, that that one's experience and perspective is what breeds wisdom, hopefully. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It can, one's perspective and experience can also yield bigotry, hatred. It doesn't necessarily go to wisdom. So there's something at the heart of wisdom that I'm not quite putting my finger on here. So Rosalind says, the mind and the soul are not the same. That's right. This is getting juicy. The mind is an instrument of the soul. Ideally, it is. Regularly and mentally asserting or remembering one's true nature to further clarify the relationship between the two. The mind is the computer while the soul is the person using the computer. Well, that it's very interesting. My inclination is to think that the soul is the highest intention of the being, and the mind is the way that the being is interpreting experience. I guess it's all just sort of nuance of the same thing, really. But I don't think a wise person says, listen to me, I'm wise. I can see a parent in a role to say, oh my gosh, like you see your child going down a path that is dangerous or dark, and you want to be able to give them warning and give them sage advice. And those are the times, unfortunately, that the children might be least likely to listen. But you want to be able to share your wisdom, your awareness with them. And sometimes, to what Bernadette is saying, Bernadette says it can backfire, but that's what I call learning. And that's how we gain wisdom a lot of times, right? Sometimes we just have to learn our own lessons. Sometimes if we're graced, we can receive wisdom and incorporate it without the horrible hard knocks. Dido says, I love this, Dido. I believe we can personally tap into the field and the flow to access inspired wisdom. I agree with you 100%, Dido. And so that in order to be able to tap into that field and that flow, what it means is getting out of the way, getting our biases, our identities, our attachments out of the way enough to be able to presence ourselves to the knowingness that's there. And one of the ways that I think we can recognize truth, truth and wisdom, it's interesting. Do they correlate? Are they the same thing? I don't necessarily think that they maybe wisdom is truth, but truth isn't necessarily wisdom. I'm not really sure about whether wisdom is true, because it is all based on perspective, right? And awareness. It does come back, everything comes back to presence, right? So Bernadette says, parent verbiage of times hopefully past. Listen to what I say, not what I do. Gotcha. So hopefully this isn't something that people are trying to enforce, do what I say, not as I do. But that's often the case, right? With parents and their relationship to the kids. Um, so wisdom, I think as I'm feeling into it, for me, real the awareness that I have, if there are moments that I have of wisdom, those moments of wisdom are born from a lot of experience, and a lot of lessons and a lot of learning. Uh, and I wasn't always the quickest learner either. I'd have to keep learning the same lesson over and over. And I'm guessing that I'm not alone in that. But after a point, like the one of the biggest lessons that I've had to learn over and over like that is pay attention, know what you know. And that means, when I say that, what that means is feel into your body, feel into your gut and the knowingness about a person or a situation. Bernadette says, LOL, I'm a late bloomer. I think that anybody that blooms is right on time, because I think so many people just don't bloom. I've had that conversation with friends about being a late bloomer. And who would have thought we'd be in our 50s or 60s and still learning life lessons that allow us, that shift the experience of life. When I was a teenager, I never ever would have imagined that I would be where I am now in life, and still incorporating these lessons. So that's where wisdom is a function of time. Time doesn't necessarily lead to wisdom, but perhaps time is one of the necessary conditions for wisdom. Experience, because with more time, we can easily say that there's more experience. It doesn't necessarily lead to wisdom, but I certainly have very different perspectives on the world now than I did when I was in my earlier years. Doesn't mean that. So Dido says wisdom does seem to be associated with age, but that does not mean all older people are wise. Not by a long shot. Not by a long shot. I agree with you 100%. And um, there are young people also who are very wise, just old souls. I think when we talk about old souls, it's those young people that are tapped in to that wider wisdom of the flow and the field. And hopefully there are more and more of those people who are really tapped in and connected. So I think that wisdom doesn't really have an ego about it. Maybe I'm idealizing it, but that's kind of, as I'm feeling into it, true wisdom doesn't necessarily, I don't think it has an ego about it. It just is observation, experience, and presence, and awareness, observation, experience, presence. So with that, I know in your sharing that there's a lot of wisdom in this group, and it's an honor to be having these conversations with you, and having you share your wisdom, and every now and then the gems that might show up from this side. I know you guys are sharing such richness with me. I so appreciate it. So that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network, on EWN One with the Earth, on Enlightened World Living. And Rosalind says, in the stillness, one can become one with their higher soul and tap into wisdom. Exactly, Rosalind. I think that's what Dido was saying as far as tapping into the field. We all have different names for it, but we do have the ability to connect to that. So carry that into your day. Let's make this a day of wisdom and awareness. So until next time, so much love and appreciation. Hopefully, I will see you again real soon.